Thursday, August 1st, 1895, they departed Great Falls at 7:35 a.m. Everyone was tired out from the long ride of the day before and the high altitude. They traveled on the Montana Central Railway, a part of the Great Northern Railway owned by J.J. Hill. James Jerome Hill, primary stockholder and president of the St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Manitoba Railway, established the Montana Central Railway on January 25th of 1886. Few railroads served Montana at the time, but Butte, Montana was a booming mining town that needed to get its metals to market. Gold and silver had been discovered near Helena, and coal companies in Canada were eager to get their fuel to Montana's smelters. Hill had already decided to build the St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Manitoba Railway across the northern tier of Montana, and it made sense to build a north-south railroad through central Montana to connect Great Falls with Helena and Butte. Another reason for building the Montana Central was Hill's investment in the city of Great Falls. Hill's close friend and business associate, Paris Gibson, had founded the town of Great Falls on the Great Falls of the Missouri River in 1883, and was promoting it as a site for the development of cheap hydroelectricity and heavy industry. Hill organized the Great Falls Water and Power and Townsite Company in 1887 with the goal of developing the town of Great Falls, providing it with power, sewage, and water, and attracting commerce and industry to the city. To attract industry, he offered low rates on the Montana Central Railway. Surveyors and engineers began grading a route between Helena and Great Falls in the winter of 1885-1886, even before the company had been incorporated. And by the end of 1886, it surveyed a route from Helena to Butte. Construction on the Great Northern's line westward began in late 1886, and on October 16, 1887, the link between Devil's Lake, North Dakota, and Fort Assinboine and Great Falls was complete. Service to Helena began in November 1887, and Butte followed on November 10, 1888. On September 18, 1889, Hill changed the name of the Minneapolis and St. Cloud Railway, which existed primarily on paper, but which held very extensive land grants throughout the Pacific Northwest, to the Great Northern Railway. On February 1st, 1890, he transferred the St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Manitoba, and Montana Central and other rail systems he owned to the Great Northern. Originally a large ranch owned by Indiana-born cattleman William. This is the territory of the Blackfoot Indians, and as with all the other Great Plains people, it had hostile relationships with the encroaching white settlers. Despite the Blackfoot's generally peaceful nature vis-a-vis the U.S. Army, they were brutally attacked by what has been described as the greatest slaughter of Indians ever made by U.S. troops. The Marias Massacre, January 23, 1870. The Army was actually after a different band, said to be harboring a fellow named Owlchild. Owlchild had murdered a white trader named Malcolm Clarke, a revenge killing. Sometime previously, Clarke apparently had raped Owlchild's wife and resulted in a stillborn child, or one killed by tribal elders. Owlchild had returned the favor, apparently, by stealing some horses from Malcolm Clarke. Clarke and his son had decided to return the favor by tracking Owlchild down and beating him severely in front of a group of other Blackfeet. Well, apparently Owlchild decided to take refuge with a band of Blackfeet led by one mountain chief. Well, the chief of the peaceful band that was attacked was named Heavy Runner. He had been alerted to the approach of the soldiers, and he walked towards them with his safe conduct paper. He was shot and killed by Army Scout Joe Cobell, whose wife was part of the camp of the hostile band led by Mountain Chief. He didn't want his wife's band attacked by the Army. When fellow scout Joe Kipp realized the error and tried to signal the troops, he was threatened by the cavalry. Well, following the death of Heavy Runner, the soldiers attacked and killed 173 Blackfeet, mostly women, children, and the elderly. The younger men were out hunting. The Army took 140 prisoners and destroyed the campsite and all their possessions. Prisoners were later released and had to make their way as refugees to Fort Benton Reservation on their own, suffering terribly from exposure. Cascade. The town of Cascade grew out of several other communities near the present site of Cascade. On the east side of the Missouri, a small town named Ulida developed at the ferry, nicknamed the Mayflower, for the Chestnut Valley freight and stage route. In 1879, George Steele opened a store in this new settlement. In 1885, the name was changed to Gorham. At that time, Thomas Gorham, who later opened a store across the river, managed the Steele store. In 1886, the land was sold to James and Mary Erskine, and in 1889, the town name was changed to St. Clair, after the couple's baby who had just died. This small town flourished. Residents built homes, and the Reverend Little started a Methodist church in 1889. It's believed that the St. Clair School was held in the living room of the log cabin parsonage. A Chinese family ran a restaurant in Steele's store. In 1886, the Montana Central started building its tracks from Great Falls on the west side of the river. Starting as a railroad crew town, a new settlement named Dodge appeared, complete with a post office run by Thomas Gorham as postmaster. When the railroad was completed in 1887, the name was changed to Cascade. Just 2 months before, the territorial legislature established Cascade County from parts of Meagher, Choctaw, Lewis and Clark, and Fergus. Before this action, the Missouri had divided Lewis and Clark County from Meagher County. From Great Falls to Craig, the first 50 miles of the line followed the west bank of the Missouri River from 1 mile south of the Sun River crossing near Great Falls to Craig. Most of the grade work was done during the fall of 1886, and with few exceptions conformed to the gradient of the river. The line was ironed in about 30 days and put into service November 19th, 1887. Tower Rock, a landmark indicating the entryway to the buffalo hunting grounds. Hardy Creek. Hardy Creek lies approximately 8 miles south of Cascade, nearly halfway between Helena and Great Falls. Named for Rufus Hardy, who came to the area in 1866. The small settlement was little more than a railroad siding for passenger and mail delivery and pickup. Hardy had its own post office in 1888 and its own school in 1895. Tunnel number 1, Green's Tunnel, 600 feet long and particularly difficult to build. It was excavated by crews working for contractors W. H. Green and A. K. Barber. At 1:30 a.m., August 12th, a block of stone 6 feet thick came loose from the ceiling. This in turn dislodged 20 feet of the tunnel's roof, crushing Jack Hayes, Joe Bush, and Sam Tillerby, who were busy installing timber lining. 4 other men were injured and evacuated to Helena. An anachronistic story of events some 13 years after Mark Twain's party passed this way. Samuel Thomas Hauser, territorial governor of Montana from 1885 to 1887, in 1894, he formed the Missouri River Power Company and won the approval of the United States Congress to build a dam, the Hauser Dam, 2 miles below Stubbs Ferry on the Missouri River. It was a steel dam built on masonry footings on the top of gravel, with the ends of the dam anchored in bedrock on either side of the river. The dam was 630 feet long and 75 feet high. Because 300 feet of the center section of the dam was built on a gravel riverbed and the rest on bedrock, sheet pilings were driven 35 feet into the riverbed and the steel of the dam attached to the pilings. The upstream face of the dam was covered in concrete and a 20-foot deep layer of volcanic ash laid down on the upstream riverbed, extending 300 feet from the dam to discourage seeping. The 10 horizontal turbines in the powerhouse delivered 14,000 kilowatts of power. Total cost of the dam at that time was $1.5 million. It became operational February 12, 1907. On April 14, 1908, at about 2:30 p.m., Hauser Dam failed after water pressure undermined the masonry footings. The first sign of trouble was when silt-heavy water began gushing from the base of the dam near the powerhouse. A power company employee, spotting the problem, ran into the powerhouse and told everybody to flee for their lives. About 15 minutes later, the masonry footings gave way, causing the upstream section of the dam to settle and a 30-foot wide breach to open in the dam. The water pouring through the breach further undermined the dam's footing, and 6 minutes later a 300-foot wide section of the dam tore loose. A surge of water 25 to 30 feet high swept downstream. The supervisor of construction, Martin Jerry, received a telephone call from the dam operators, alerting him to the dam's destruction. He immediately sent telegrams to all towns and cities downstream, warning them of the coming flood. The Great Northern Railway locomotive was dispatched to the city of Great Falls, 70 miles downstream, warning stations along the way about the dam break. The flood reached the small town of Craig, Montana, about 7 p.m., but the narrow canyons of the Missouri River above the town helped hold back part of the floodwaters. The residents of the town received plenty of warning and were evacuated. The famous Iron Craig Bridge, normally 25 feet above water, had more than 2 feet of water over its deck and was feared doomed, but it held. The Great Northern Railway tracks from Craig to Ulm were underwater. Damages were estimated at more than $1 million. Wolf Creek, a river runs through it. Nestled deep in the Big Belt Mountains in one of the most spectacular canyons in Montana, Wolf Creek was established as a stop along the Montana Central Railroad. Wolf Creek reportedly got its name from a local Indian legend that stated when the buffalo were being driven over a nearby cliff to their death, a wolf went along for the ride. They named the creek that flowed by the cliff the creek where the wolf jumped to, or the creek that the wolf jumped in. Prior to Wolf Creek being established, there was a town called Cartersville, founded where Little Wolf Creek empties into Little Prickly Pear Creek. Wolf Creek grew from Cartersville to serve the railroad. The Wolf Creek Hotel, built in 1887, served as a stage stop along routes from Helena to Augusta and Fort Benton. 2 cabins served as railroad housing. Prior to the construction of the railroad, the first road constructed through the canyon was a toll road built in 1865 by the Little Prickly Pear Wagon Road Company. By the early 1870s, the road was an important freight and passenger route in the territory. Mullen Military Road ran through a portion of Prickly Pear Canyon in 1860. 5 years later, the road became part of the Little Prickly Pear Canyon Wagon Toll Road. and then was called the Benton Road until 1887, when the Montana Central Railroad obliterated much of it. Malcolm Clarke had the concession for that toll road. Clarke had been married to Kakokima, daughter of a pagan chief. They had 6 children. He next married good-singing Sandoval and had 5 children. It seems that Clarke's death was actually a family affair rather than a dispute between whites and Indians. Clarke's wife was sister to the wife of Owl Child. Owl Child was a son of Mountain Chief and brother to Big Brave, the last Mountain Chief. And while Owl Child was out hunting, it is said that Clarke went over and raped Owl Child's wife. She told her husband, but he hid his feelings. Instead, he took her to Mountain Chief's band and traveled to Clarke's ranch. Chief Mountain knew nothing of these events. It seems Owl Child did not go alone. It is reported that after an evening of conviviality with his Indian friends, Clarke was shot and killed by Eagle Rib, Pete Owl Child, and perhaps some other pagans, while his son Horace was shot in the head. These events were followed by the Marias Massacre, or Baker's Massacre, or the Pagan Massacre, which I've already talked about. Many blame Major Eugene Baker for attacking the wrong band and the scale of the slaughter. It was also discovered that many in the camp were dying of smallpox. General Sheridan, however, succeeded in preventing an official investigation. The Blackfeet no longer had the resources to retaliate and had come to recognize Americans as a very brutal people. One perhaps positive outcome of this was that President Ulysses S. Grant ended any discussion of returning control of Indian affairs to the Army. The corruption of civilian Indian agents had become common knowledge, and Grant appointed as Indian agents Quakers and other persons affiliated with religious groups. Exiting the canyon, we go past the location of Malcolm Clarke's ranch, likely location where he met his demise. Silver City, the first county seat of Lewis and Clark County. The National Silver Panic of 1893 ended the county's accelerated development. Virtually all silver mines closed, affecting the Rimney area, and places west of Marysville in particular. Many Helena fortunes were ruined, and the collateral economic effects prompted entire communities to be abandoned in an exodus of population never seen since. Struggling survivors held on to gold production, still vital at places like Maryville's Drum and Lummen mine and Spring Hill, south of Helena. But the industry was much reduced. Agriculture surfaced as the major industry. Helena's political and financial status buffered the impact, but the days of confident wealth were over. Rail lines withered, schools closed, and the importance of formerly marginal influences such as recreation, public service, lumbering, and small businesses rose to the fore. Mining continued on a sporadic basis, and reworking of old mine leavings, mechanized placer minings, dredging, and later some mineral mining, sapphires, remained active. From Craig to Helena, the second 50 miles of the line, followed Little Prickly Pear Creek to the summit at Silver, then descended into Helena Valley, crossed the North Pacific west of town, and climbed into the terminal grounds on Lower Last Chance Gulch. Most of the preparation work was done in 1886, and the gradient seldom exceeded 1%. The line was put into service also on November 19th, 1887. Helena. By 1888, about 50 millionaires lived in Helena, more per capita than in any city in the world. They had made their fortunes from gold. About 3.6 billion in today's dollars of gold was taken from Last Chance Gulch over a 20-year period. The Last Chance Placer is one of the most famous placer deposits in the western United States. Most of the production occurred before 1868. This large concentration of wealth was the basis of developing fine residences and ambitious architecture in the city. Its Victorian neighbors reflect the gold years. Numerous miners also attracted the development of a thriving red light district. Among the well-known local madams was Josephine Chicago Joe Airy, who built a thriving business empire between 1874 and 1893, becoming one of the largest and most influential landowners in Helena. East Helena. In 1888, a large lead smelter was built on the banks of Prickly Pear Creek in the Helena Valley by the Helena and Livingston Lead Smelting Company. In 1898, the American Smelting and Refining Company purchased the 160-acre site. Asarco operated the smelter until 2001. East Helena grew up around that enterprise. For over a century, the smelter processed 70,000 tons of lead bullion a year and provided a livelihood for thousands of families. It also produced untold tons of toxic contaminants. Montana City. Montana City is located on top of one of the oldest prehistoric sites in the state of Montana. As early as 9000 BCE, Native Americans came to Montana City to collect chert, a rock similar to flint which was used to make spear tips, arrowheads, and knives. White American explorers discovered gold at the site on July 2nd, 1862, and later that year United States Army Captain Jason L. Fisk brought a mule train from Minnesota which stopped at the site and built the first houses that became Montana City. The town became one of the most important mining centers in Montana during the height of the gold rush in the 1860s. The Montana Town Company laid out the city in 1864, naming it after the state's new territorial name. Chinese miners took over from whites when the mines began to play out in 1868, and the town saw a brief revival after the arrival of the railroads and the establishment of a post office in the 1880s. At its height in the 1880s, Montana City had 3,000 residents and competed for the location of the state capital. From Helena to Clancy, the first 5.9 miles of the line south of Helena paralleled the North Pacific to East Helena, originally called Easton, the Four Range. The road then turned south, climbing along Prickly Pear Creek to Alhambra. Here it paralleled the Helena and Jefferson County Railroad, built in 1883 to reach Wicks. Clancy. Clancy boomed in the 1870s as a silver placer mining camp and quickly absorbed nearby towns like the once prosperous Prickly Pear City. When the silver diggings dwindled in the 1890s, Clancy would have died too were it not for the efforts of Henry Hill, a Clancy resident. Hill had helped to establish Montana's first woolen mill in Clancy in 1879. And in 1896 he built a railroad yard on his ranch, which he sold to the Montana Central. Alhambra. Alhambra was a resort town situated south of Helena and relied on the heavy traffic during the golden days of mining in the area. Alhambra and Sunnyside Hot Springs were the two hotels in the town, together composing a medical and recreational resort that flourished in the 1860s. Alhambra Hot Springs consisted of 4 main springs and a number of hot water seeps located along Warm Springs Creek. The water temperature averages 138 degrees Fahrenheit and is slightly radioactive. Corbin. Corbin was an important mining town in the 1890s and included a stamp mill and heavy infrastructure for the time, which yielded decent amounts of gold and silver. Alta Mine, in particular, was a major silver mine in the area, which the town developed around. A post office was active in Corbin from 1887. Wicks. The silver mines around Wicks were among the earliest developed in Montana. The first mine, the Gregory, was located by an unknown prospector in 1864 and was the site of the second silver smelter built in Montana in 1867. Discovered in 1869, the Alta proved to be one of the richest silver mines in Montana. In 1876, its original owners sold the property to a group of New York capitalists, headed by William W. Wicks. The cartel organized the Montana Company that same year and platted the community of Wicks in either 1876 or 1877. The camp had around 400 residents by 1880. Boulder Tunnel, tunnel number 6, 6,115 feet long, the longest tunnel on Hills railroads until 1929. Contractors began work in March of 1887, and the first train passed through October 25th, 1888. 11 men were killed during its construction. Until it was finished, the Montana Central used the Northern Pacific Line over Boulder Hill. Northern Pacific later abandoned their own line from Clancy to Amazon in lieu of trackage rights through the tunnel. By 1891, the tunnel's wooden lining was replaced with brick and granite. 6-foot wide steel beam was inserted in the ceiling. During 1882 and 1883, the railroad was again detoured. Portals were added to the tunnel in 1893, extending the tunnel by 30 feet. Doors at both ends of the tunnel prevented ice buildup. The community of Wicks was a booming, although atypically quiet, mining camp by mid-1880s. The Weekly Herald reported that no liquor is allowed in the camp, and any employee who becomes intoxicated loses his place at once. Regardless, the camp boasted a public library, and the firm of Vater and Wicks built a substantial stone building that sold everything which the people of the camp required. Boulder City, named for the many large boulders in the vicinity. The town of Boulder Valley was established in the early 1860s as a stagecoach station on the route between Fort Benton and Virginia City. It later became a trading center for nearby agricultural areas and the Elkhorn, Comet, and Baltimore mining districts. The Great Northern Railway branch line from Helena to Butte reached Boulder in 1888. State schools for the deaf, blind, and developmentally disabled were established in the city in 1892. Basin. The town of Basin began as a 19th century mining camp near the confluence of Basin Creek with the Boulder River. Gold deposits at the mouth of Cataract Creek, about half a mile downstream of Basin, were reported as early as 1862. Prospectors staked claims and built cabins, and within a few years, placer mining extended the full length of Cataract and Basin Creeks. When a settlement was established in Basin, the buildings at the mouth of Cataract Creek were gradually moved to Basin, and the Cataract camp was abandoned. Searches for the lode veins of both creeks succeeded by the 1870s, and eventually led to significant lode mining at the Eva May, Uncle Sam, Gray Eagle, Hattie Ferguson, and Comet mines in the Cataract Creek district, and the Bullion, Hope, and Katy mines in the Basin Creek district. By 1880, the settlement at Basin became the local source of supplies for mines and miners. Montana Central Railroad reached Bernice, 5 miles west of Basin, in June of 1888. While never a town, several mines were located on the hillside above Bernice, and Lake Wilder was only 2 miles south. Just across the Boulder River was the stage station at Calvin's Ranch. Bernice was a water stop for southbound trains, and it housed a section gang. For a time, there were charcoal kilns there that supplied fuel to the region's mills. Passenger trains brought Butte families to Wilder to enjoy fresh air and scenery on the man-made lake. Elk Park Pass, elevation 6,352 feet. It's a mountain pass on the Continental Divide. Elk Park Pass lies on the border between Silver Bow and Jefferson counties and is remarkable for its highly asymmetrical nature. The approach from the north is through namesake Elk Park, a high, mostly treeless plain, and the grade is almost imperceptible. Elevation at the northeast end of the park, about 10 miles from the pass, is about 6,200 feet, only 152 feet lower than the pass itself. However, at the south end, the highway drops 750 feet from the pass into Butte, over a distance of only about 4 miles. Elk Park. Elk Park, the 10-mile-long valley north of Butte, boasts a colorful history of providing the mining city with everything from milk to moonshine. The area was known for its cattle ranching, dairy production, ice making, logging, and even some less than legal activities. Everybody had a copper cow. Folks also had real cows and produced some wholesome products of milk and other dairy items. Most of the early settlers were of Swiss ancestry and brought dairy skills with them. They would cart the milk down to the mining city each day. During hard times in Butte, the Elk Park dairy farmers gave milk to families that couldn't pay. They knew the milk was going to go bad anyway, and they'd rather have a child have the milk and let the family pay them back later. August 2nd, Butte, Montana. Arriving in Butte, they took rooms at the Butte Hotel. We had entered the Rocky Mountains through a canyon of the upper Missouri. We have climbed mountains all day, and at Butte are nearly 8,000 feet high. It tells on me, but the others escape. The ladies declare it has been one of the most interesting days of their lives, and Mark has taken in everything but kept from talking. After reaching the hotel, he kept quiet in bed until he went to the hall. He more than made up for last night's disappointment and was at his best. I escorted Mrs. Clemens and Clara to a box in the theater, expecting to return immediately to the hotel, but I found myself listening and sat through the lecture, enjoying every word. It actually seemed as if I had never known him to be quite so good. He was great. The house was full and very responsive, and after the lecture, many of his former Nevada friends came forward to greet him. We went to a fine club where champagne and stories blended until 12, much to the delight of many gentlemen. Mark never drinks champagne. His is hot Scotch, winter and summer, without any sugar, and never before 11 p.m.